The light within the grand orrery of the Galactic Lyceum for Interspecies Studies was a soft, universal silver, designed to be least offensive to the multispectral visual organs of its diverse student body. It glinted off Kalen's crystalline facets, fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced on the polished obsidian floor. Kalen, a glypton of the third phase emergence, remained perfectly still, processing. Before him, a holographic sphere of a muddy blue and white planet spun lazily. It was designated Sol 3, but its inhabitants called it Earth. "Observe!" Instructor Zorlin's voice resonated, not through the air, but as a direct, psionic vibration that each student perceived in their species' native mode of communication. To Kalen, it was a series of pure, logical tones. "We have spent this cycle analyzing species performance metrics. The Kragger, whose data we have just concluded, are a textbook example of individual superiority. Peak physical specimens, with redundant organ systems and a cellular regeneration rate that is frankly astounding. On a one-to-one basis, a Kragger warrior could defeat any 10 individuals from 1,000 other species. Yet their civilization has remained static for 10 millennia, confined to their home system. Now we turn to the anomaly." The display shifted. Data streams, dense with metrics, flowed around the spinning globe of Earth. Kalen's internal processors whirred, cross-referencing, collating, searching for a pattern that refused to emerge. The data was a cacophony of contradictions. Individual human metrics, physical strength, subpar, median score, 43 out of a possible 1,000. Durability, abysmal, 27. Susceptible to kinetic shock, atmospheric variance, and a bewildering array of microorganisms. Lifespan, pathetically brief. Average 82 revolutions around their star. Sensory acuity, unremarkable. Limited visual spectrum, poor olfactory range, average auditory capabilities. Cognitive processing speed, mediocre. Slower than a glypton, less parallel than a Vex Nexus mind, prone to emotional interference. Individual problem-solving, inconsistent. Capable of flashes of brilliance but hampered by cognitive biases and irrationality. "As you can see," Zorlin's thought tone was dry, "by every individual metric we value, the species human is profoundly unimpressive. They are fragile, short-lived generalists. Masters of nothing." A low grumble echoed from the back of the chamber. It was Grack, a young Kragger whose formidable physique seemed barely contained by the delicate suspension field that served as his chair. "Then this is a short lesson, instructor. They are prey, why do we study them?" "A pertinent question, student Grack," Zorlin replied, a flicker of amusement in his psionic signature. "Because of this." The data streams reconfigured. The individual metrics faded, replaced by a single, colossal chart labeled Collective Species Performance. The bar representing humanity soared above all others, dwarfing the Kragger, the intellectually supreme Glyptons, even the hyper-efficient Vex hive mind. Collective metrics, technological acceleration rate, exponential, unprecedented. Intersystem expansion velocity, logarithmic and increasing. In a mere 300 of their years, they had established a presence in 12 star systems. Cultural output and diversity, immeasurable. A chaotic explosion of art, philosophy, music, and literature that evolved on a weekly basis. Resource adaptation and utilization, peerless. They could terraform, build habitats in vacuum, or adapt their own biology to survive in environments that would kill a dozen other species. Resilience to extinction-level events, highest recorded. They had survived self-inflicted nuclear wars, asteroid impacts, and pandemics, each time emerging with a more robust and diverse technological base. The silence in the orrery was absolute. Kalen felt a sensation his people rarely experienced: confusion. The data was irreconcilable. It was as if one were to describe a flock of flightless birds that could somehow cross a galaxy. The components did not support the conclusion. "This is your final project for the cycle," Zorlin's voice washed over them. "You will form a research cohort. Your task is to resolve this paradox. Analyze the data, form a hypothesis, and present your findings. The archives on Sol 3 are now fully open to you. Dismissed." The silver light brightened, signaling the end of the session. Students began to move, their various forms of locomotion creating a strange symphony of clicks, slithers, and thuds. Kalen remained, his gaze fixed on the impossible chart. He was joined by Grack, whose heavy presence was a physical weight in the air. "A data error," Grack stated, his voice a gravelly rumble. "The archives must be corrupted. No species so weak can be so dominant." "The Lyceum archives are never corrupted," Kalen countered, his own voice a series of perfectly modulated chimes. "The error is not in the data, but in our interpretation." Two others approached their small circle. Lyra, a Vex, moved with a liquid grace. Her species was a collective consciousness, and she was a semi-autonomous drone, a sensory organ for a mind spanning an entire planet. Her thoughts were not entirely her own, and she often spoke in pluralities. "We have observed this before. A seemingly weak species is controlled by a hidden master, a puppeteer race. It is the only logical explanation for coordinated action on this scale without an overt hive structure." The final member of their nascent cohort drifted closer, a shimmering cloud of motile spores that coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape. This was TC, a Sylvan whose people communicated through empathetic projection and biochemical exchange. "I felt it in the data," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "It's not control, it's a resonance. A storm of emotion. Pain, joy, fear, love. It's deafening." Kalen swiveled his crystalline head to regard his new team. A warrior who only understood strength, a drone who only understood unity through control, and an empath who felt things he could not quantify. And himself, a logician who was failing to find the logic. "The instructor has tasked us with resolving the paradox," Kalen chimed, his tone formalizing their group. Grack's skepticism, Lyra's hypothesis of a hidden controller, and TC's emotional analysis are all valid starting points. "Let us convene in Analysis Chamber 7 and begin. The human paradox will not solve itself." Analysis Chamber 7 was a sterile white space, its walls capable of becoming high-resolution displays on command. Kalen immediately interfaced with the room's core, projecting a timeline of human history onto the main wall. It was a bloody, chaotic mess. Wars, famines, plagues, and genocides were splashed across the centuries in violent bursts of red. "Look at this," Grack gestured with a massive three-fingered hand. "They spend most of their history killing each other over trivialities, disagreements over which Sky Spirit is real, the color of their skin, patches of dirt. A Kragger only kills for honor or to cull weakness from the clan. This is just senseless slaughter." "The inefficiency is staggering," Lyra agreed, her multifaceted eyes scanning the data stream she had projected on a side wall. "The energy expenditure on internal conflict is astronomical. Our own history has no such phase. We have always been we. There was never a time when one part of the Vex mind sought to destroy another. These humans seem to be at war with themselves. But look at what happens after the conflicts," Kalen interjected, highlighting a period following one of their so-called world wars. "Technological advancement explodes. They develop rudimentary spaceflight, atomic energy, and global communication networks in less than a single human lifetime. The rate of change is directly proportional to the intensity of the preceding conflict." "It's the pressure," TC murmured, her form wavering as she processed the emotional residue from the historical records. "The fear of annihilation forces them to innovate. They create their most beautiful art in times of great sorrow and their most incredible technologies in times of great fear. Their creativity is forged in the crucible of their own self-destructive tendencies." Kalen found this concept illogical. On Glypton, progress was a slow, steady, linear process. They solved one problem, then moved to the next. There was no chaos, no pressure. There was only the calm, inexorable march of logic. The human model was like trying to build a tower by setting off explosions beneath its foundation. "Let us examine a specific event," Kalen proposed, isolating a file. "Event classification, natural disaster. Location, a coastal city called New Orleans. A massive storm, widespread flooding. Governmental response. Slow, inefficient. The walls flickered to life with archival footage. Water surged through streets. Structures collapsed. Individual humans were shown clinging to rooftops, their faces masks of terror. C. Fragile, Grack grunted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. But then the scene changed. The initial shock wore off. Small boats, not from any official fleet, began to appear. Individual humans with no formal orders piloted them through the treacherous waters. They pulled strangers from the flood, sharing their meager resources. They formed spontaneous supply chains, rescue teams, and temporary shelters. There was no central command, no hive mind directing their actions. It was chaotic, messy, and profoundly effective. Lyra was visibly stunned. They have no directive, no nexus command. They are acting as independent units, yet their actions are converging toward a common goal. How do they coordinate? They are talking to each other, TC said softly. The audio feed was a jumble of shouts, cries, and reassurances. And they are touching, a hand on a shoulder, an embrace. They are transferring emotional data, building temporary bonds of trust. Kalen watched a grainy video of one human giving their last bottle of clean water to another, a complete stranger. This was an act that defied all models of self-preservation. It was inefficient and illogical. A Glypton would calculate the probabilities and preserve the resource for itself, ensuring its own survival to contribute to the collective later. This is not logic, Kalen chimed, the realization striking him with the force of a physical blow. This is something else. Grack pointed to a scene where a group of humans worked together to lift a heavy piece of debris, freeing a trapped individual. None of them were individually strong enough, but together they accomplished the task. They are weak alone, he said, his voice laced with a strange new respect. But they lend their strength to each other. The cohort fell silent, the images of chaotic, selfless, and desperate cooperation washing over them. They were witnessing the paradox in action. A species of individually weak, irrational, and disorganized beings who, when faced with a crisis, could spontaneously form a collective entity more resilient and effective than any of them were alone. Kalen brought the simulation to a halt. The images vanished, leaving them once again in the sterile white room. Lyra's hypothesis of a hidden controller is incorrect, he stated. The control is not hidden, it is emergent. It is a property of the system itself, not an external force. And it is not cold logic, TC added. It is what they call empathy. Empathy, Grack tested the word. Feeling the weakness of another and choosing to share it rather than exploit it. The Kragger would call that madness. The Kragger are confined to their home system, Kalen replied, his chimes soft but firm. The humans are not. We must discard our species' biases. The human advantage is not in their strength, or their logic, or their unity. The evidence suggests it is born from their weakness, their irrationality, and their disunity. This is the core of the paradox, and we have only just begun to understand it. The next phase of their research took them deeper into the fundamentals of human existence. They moved from history to biology, hoping to find a genetic or neurological key to this emergent collectivism. The genome is a mess, Lyra declared, her display a dizzying helix of base pairs highlighted in dozens of colors. It is riddled with dormant viral code, redundant sequences, and genetic artifacts from countless evolutionary dead ends. There is no elegance to it. Our Vex genome is a crystalline lattice of pure function. Every sequence has a purpose, honed over millions of years for the betterment of the collective. And yet, your species has not changed its fundamental form in eons, Kalen countered, pointing to a section of the human DNA. Look here. This is what their scientists call junk DNA. It appears to do nothing. But when the organism is under environmental stress, certain sections of this junk can become active, leading to rapid, unpredictable mutations. It introduces chaos into the system. It makes them adaptable, TC breathed. Their biology is not rigid, it's fluid. It is designed to be imperfect to allow for mistakes. Some mistakes are fatal, but some lead to new advantages. Grack was studying their neurobiology. Their brains are also peculiar. There is a constant conflict between the older, more primitive structures, the ones that govern fear, aggression, tribalism, and the newer, more advanced prefrontal cortex which handles logic and long-term planning. He grunted. A Kragger's mind is unified. Intent and action are one. A human can want to do one thing and be driven by instinct to do the complete opposite. It is a mind at war with itself. The internal conflict mirrors their external conflicts. Kalen mused, connecting the data points. Their greatest weakness, their irrational, emotional, primitive core, is inextricably linked to their greatest strength. The friction between their instincts and their intellect generates something, a creative spark, a desperate drive. To test this, they decided to analyze a purely human concept, something with no parallel in their own cultures: humor. Kalen queued up a recording of a human stand-up comedian from the late 20th century. The being stood on a stage, holding a microphone, making a series of observations about social conventions and daily frustrations. The audience of other humans would periodically erupt in loud, barking vocalizations. Grack was bewildered. Why are they making that noise? Is it a threat display? We believe it is a signal of enjoyment, Lyra stated, analyzing the physiological data. Endorphin levels are elevated, stress indicators are reduced. Social cohesion in the group is measurably increased. He is talking about his own failures, TC observed, her form glowing with a soft, empathetic light. He describes his own foolishness, his own weaknesses, and by doing so, he makes the others feel less alone in theirs. This humor is a mechanism for acknowledging shared imperfection. It is a form of communal empathy. Kalen tried to analyze the comedian's speech patterns for logical structure, but found none. The jokes relied on wordplay, absurd juxtapositions, and violations of expectation. It was pure, celebrated irrationality. And yet, it was clearly performing a vital social function. It was a tool for managing the immense psychological stress of being a conflicted, self-aware creature on a dangerous world. It was a bonding agent. They have built entire technologies around this principle, Kalen announced, his discovery sending a ripple of excitement through his processors. He brought up a new display. It wasn't about starships or weapons, it was about stories. They call it fiction, he explained. Narratives of events that never occurred about people who never existed. They consume these stories voraciously, in printed form, as audiovisual performances, as interactive simulations. The amount of resources they dedicate to this is second only to their dedication to warfare. Lyra tilted her head. What is its function? It seems a profound waste of time and energy. It is a social simulator, Kalen explained, the pieces clicking into place. Through these stories, a single human can live 1,000 lives. They can experience situations they will never face. They can feel the emotions of others from different cultures, different times, even different species in their fiction. It is a way of practicing empathy. It allows them to build complex models of other minds, to predict their actions, to understand their motivations. TC shimmered in agreement. It is how they transmit wisdom, not just data but emotional knowledge. A Glypton stores facts. A human stores stories. The story of a hero teaches courage. The story of a tragedy teaches compassion. The story of a fool teaches humility. Grack was watching a scene from a human epic, a fantasy where a small, physically weak creature was tasked with a world-saving quest. He watched as this creature succeeded not through strength, but through loyalty, perseverance, and the help of his friends, who were all from different tribes and races. They value this, Grack asked, his voice unexpectedly quiet. They celebrate weakness that is overcome by fellowship. It is their foundational myth, TC affirmed. The story they tell themselves over and over again, that the smallest, most insignificant individual can change the world not alone but together. This was the breakthrough. The key was not in their hardware, their biology, but in their software, their culture. Humanity had developed a second, parallel system of evolution. While their genes evolved slowly, blindly, their culture, their ideas, stories, and technologies evolved at lightning speed. And the primary engine of that cultural evolution was a set of social technologies designed to foster trust and cooperation between unrelated individuals who were, by nature, selfish and tribal. Empathy, storytelling, humor, art, music, these were not frivolous pastimes. They were the load-bearing structures of their entire civilization. Their individual mediocrity is a feature, not a bug, Kalen stated, the paradox finally resolving in his mind into a beautiful, coherent theory. A species of individual specialists like the Glyptons or the Krager is rigid. We are optimized for a specific environment, a specific way of thinking. Humans are not optimized for anything. They are a blank slate. Their biology makes them generalists, but their culture allows them to become temporary specialists in any field required. He gestured to the wall. A single human cannot design a starship. It is too complex. But a human collective can. One human specializes in metallurgy, another in propulsion, another in navigation, another in life support. They are not born with this knowledge. They learn it. They absorb it from the collective pool of information their culture has accumulated. And they are able to work together because their social technologies, their stories, their shared myths, their capacity for empathy, allow them to build trust. So their strength is not their own, Grack rumbled. It is borrowed from their ancestors and their peers. Precisely, Kalen chimed. A glypton is born with near-perfect recall of all its progenitors' knowledge. It is a closed system. A human is born knowing almost nothing. They are an open system, designed to download information from the culture around them. It is slower and messier, but it is infinitely more flexible. And it allows for error correction, Lyra added, seeing the concept through her own systemic lens. In the Vex mind, a flawed idea introduced by the Nexus is accepted by all drones. It can lead to systemic failure. In human culture, a flawed idea is debated. They argue about it. It is inefficient, but it means that bad ideas are eventually challenged and discarded, while good ideas are tested and refined. Their final presentation to instructor Zorlin was not a simple recitation of facts, but a narrative in itself. Kalen began, laying out the initial paradox of weak individuals forming a powerful collective. Grack followed, speaking with grudging admiration of how humans weaponized their weakness, using fellowship and self-sacrifice to overcome physical limitations that would have doomed a Kragger. Lyra then explained the concept of emergent, decentralized coordination, contrasting it with the rigid control of a hive mind, and highlighting its chaotic but resilient nature. Finally, TC spoke, her voice a gentle wave of empathy, describing the social technologies of story and emotion that served as the glue binding their entire civilization together. In conclusion, instructor, Kalen finished, his crystalline form resonating with the conviction of his discovery. The human paradox is resolved thusly. Humanity's superiority is not found in the performance of the individual unit, but in the interface protocol between the units. Their flesh is weak, their minds are irrational, their instincts are primitive. But their culture, their shared software, is the most advanced engine for collective problem-solving the galaxy has ever known. They are not a species of brilliant individuals. They are a species whose true genius lies in their ability to form a brilliant collective out of profoundly flawed and mediocre parts. Their strength is not the sum of its parts. It is an exponential product of their interaction. Instructor Zorlin remained silent for a long moment after they finished. The grand orrery was still, the silver light seeming to hold its breath. Kalen worried they had missed some crucial detail, that their elegant theory was about to be dismantled by a single, irrefutable fact. Then, Zorlin's psionic signature pulsed with a warmth Kalen had never felt from him before. It was the feeling of approval. "You have succeeded," Zorlin's thought voice filled the chamber. "You have looked past the surface-level data and grasped the essential nature of the species. Many cohorts before you have failed. The Kragger see only weakness. The Glyptons see only irrationality. The Vex see only chaos. You have worked together using your unique perspectives not as biases but as lenses. You have, in a small way, emulated the very process you were studying." The students exchanged glances, a current of shared pride passing between them. "However," Zorlin continued, his tone turning grave, "your analysis is incomplete. You have identified the engine of their success. You have not yet considered the consequences of its design." The instructor gestured, and a new simulation appeared in the center of the orrery. It was a model of galactic expansion. The human area of influence, marked in blue, was expanding slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, like a stain spreading across the star chart. Other civilizations, marked in other colors, were shown. When the blue of humanity touched them, some were absorbed peacefully. Others, however, simply vanished. "Their social bonding technology, their empathy, is powerful," Zorlin explained. "But it has a critical flaw. Its range is limited. Humans form tribes, their city, their nation, their planet. They will die for a member of their in-group, as you observed, but they have historically demonstrated a terrifying capacity for cruelty to those they define as being in the out-group. The simulation zoomed in on one of the vanished civilizations. A peaceful, silicon-based species that communicated through slow, complex mathematical equations. The records showed the initial human contact was friendly, but the humans grew impatient with the slow pace of communication. They saw the species' vast computational resources not as a mind to be communed with, but as a resource to be exploited. When the species did not comply, the humans, with chilling efficiency, dismantled their entire civilization and turned their planet into a massive computer core for the human colonial network. Their empathy is a switch, not a constant, Zorlin stated, the words landing like ice shards in Kalen's mind. And their culture, which allows them to rapidly adapt and overcome any challenge, also allows them to rapidly justify any action. Their stories can be used to build bridges, but they can also be used to build walls, to dehumanize an enemy, to turn a competitor into an obstacle to be removed. Kalen, Grak, Lyra, and TC watched in horror. They had been so captivated by humanity's potential for good, for cooperation, for breathtaking creation, that they had overlooked the other side of the coin. The same engine that drove their heroic self-sacrifice in a flood was the one that drove their genocidal conquests. The same adaptability that let them thrive in any environment let them rationalize any atrocity. Their exponential technological growth, combined with their tribalistic empathy and their capacity for cultural self-justification, makes them the most dynamically dangerous species we have ever encountered, Zorlin concluded. They are not evil in the way a predator is evil. They are simply expansive. They are a wildfire and the galaxy is a dry forest. Their collective genius is an existential threat to any civilization that cannot match its pace or withstand its friction. The simulation faded, leaving the four students in a profound, altered silence. They had solved the puzzle of human superiority, only to be confronted with the terrifying problem of human expansion. So, what is the answer? Lyra finally asked, her usual systemic certainty gone, replaced by a note of genuine fear. What is the correct galactic response? Observation, quarantine, preemptive action. Instructor Zorlin turned his ancient, unknowable gaze upon them. That is not a question for this class. That is a question that our leaders and yours are debating right now. Your task was to understand. You have done so. Now you must live with that understanding. The session was over. The four of them left the orrery, not with the triumph of a solved problem, but with the heavy burden of a terrible truth. They walked together, their footsteps echoing in the vast, silent halls of the Lyceum. They had started as a Glypton, a Kragger, a Vex, and a Sylvan. But their shared journey into the heart of the human paradox had changed them. They were a cohort now, a small, temporary collective, bound by a shared, unsettling knowledge. They stopped at a large viewport that looked out upon a simulated starfield. Kalen found the star designated Sol on the chart. It was an unremarkable yellow dwarf, one of billions. It looked so harmless. To be so flawed, TC whispered, her form a somber gray, and yet so powerful it must be a terrible weight to be human. Grak stared at the tiny point of light. They are not strong, they are not smart, they are not united. They are just more together than they are apart, and they will never ever stop. And in that moment, Kalen understood the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. The driving force behind humanity's relentless, chaotic, creative, and destructive expansion wasn't greed or logic or malice. It was the simple, terrifying, and profound consequence of their nature. It was loneliness. They were a species of disconnected individuals, each a universe of thought and feeling, trapped in a fragile, temporary shell. And their entire civilization, from their first campfires to their star-spanning empire, was a desperate, collective scream into the void. A project to build a connection large enough to finally make them feel like they were not alone. And they would tear the galaxy apart to find it.